In the military, the smoke pit is more than just a place to light a cigarette. It's a refuge, a confessional, and a stage for stories that defy reason. Whether it's a few stacked pallets in a scorching overseas desert or a concrete pavilion outside a barracks in Okinawa, the smoke pit draws soldiers like moths to a flickering flame, where the forbidden conversations about the strange and inexplicable come alive. In 2015, stationed in a foreign land, Sergeant M found himself on desk duty, a 24-hour rotation at charge quarters, passing the endless hours with books, video games, and restless patrols, while keeping a wary eye on high-risk soldiers confined to the barracks, those who teetered on the edge of chaos, a fragile mix of anger, fear, and rumor. Among them was a soldier whispered to practice dark magic, a private whose barracks room became a shrine of chaos. Chicken bones lashed into mysterious symbols hung from the ceiling, candles burned in a ritualistic circle, furniture shoved aside, and a stench of rot and decay saturated the air, creating a palpable aura of menace that clung to the walls. Sergeant M, experienced yet curious, felt an uneasy thrill as he walked through the filth, noting the room's unsettling energy, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand rigid and your instincts scream to leave. Though a cleanup crew eventually restored the room to sterile order, the strange echoes lingered. Soldiers whispered of noises, shuffles, and low, distorted roars emanating from the once-occupied room, events that were dismissed as pranks yet gnawed at the edge of belief. Then came the night when Sergeant M, alone at the desk with a CQ runner, heard a sound like metal tearing, a scream played backward, emanating from the emptied barracks room. Approaching with trepidation, they discovered no source, only the unmistakable feeling of being watched, a psychic weight pressing against their chests. Moments later, as they left, the door slammed with impossible force, shoving the lieutenant backward, the hydraulic closer, defying the laws of physics. The incident remained unlocked, a secret added to the smoke pit lore, a story that would grow in retellings, blending fear and fascination into a singular memory. Around the smoke pit, stories like this circulate endlessly, each retelling more vivid than the last, as soldiers share encounters of the inexplicable, of dark rituals, and shadows that move with a consciousness of their own. And though logic tries to intervene, the chill of the unknown is a language understood by all who have lingered too long at the edge of the light. Cigarette smoke curling in the air, eyes scanning the darkness, knowing that the war outside is nothing compared to the war within the unseen corners of their own barracks. The barracks at Camp Margarita, like many military housing facilities, carried the weight of discipline and monotony, but hidden beneath its mundane routine lurked whispers of the unexplainable, shadows that moved when no one should be watching, and rooms steeped in an energy that made the strongest soldier uneasy. Sergeant M had seen his share of strange behavior among soldiers, but nothing prepared him for the room of a private rumored to practice dark magic. A man whose anger and obsession with the occult had left a mark not just on his reputation, but on the very fabric of the barracks. On the night of desk duty, the 24-hour rotations stretching into the small hours, the room itself seemed alive, a chaotic shrine to something ancient and malevolent. Chicken bones tied into cryptic symbols hung from the ceiling. A circle of burnt candles on the floor radiated a faint, almost imperceptible heat, and rotting remnants of food and refuse clung to every surface, releasing a stench so foul it was physically repulsive. The officer in charge, along with Sergeant M and the supply sergeant, inspected the room, noting the unsettling aura that seemed to twist the air, pressing against them with invisible hands. The rumors of occult practices, once dismissed as idle chatter, seemed to take shape in the meticulous arrangement of bones and symbols, the unnatural stillness that dominated the space, and the feeling that eyes unseen were tracking their every move. Even after a professional cleanup stripped the room of its physical horrors, the psychological residue remained. Soldiers reported hearing scratching, murmurs, and faint, distorted roars emanating from the unoccupied room, events dismissed in logs as pranks or the imagination of sleep-deprived Marines. Yet the stories persisted, gaining layers of terror with each retelling. One particular night, Sergeant M and his CQ runner were alone when a sudden roar erupted from the room, a sound like metal tearing while a scream played backward, causing both men to freeze in disbelief. Approaching cautiously, they found nothing, yet the oppressive sensation of being watched intensified, the hair on their arms standing rigid as if charged by some unseen force. Moments later, as they exited, the door slammed shut with impossible velocity, shoving a lieutenant backward, the hydraulic door closer resisting no force they could comprehend, leaving them shaken, unable to rationalize the event and unwilling to log in officially. The barracks, otherwise a sterile, orderly place, had become a liminal space where reality seemed to bend, the physical environment colliding with the metaphysical. Soldiers exchanged tales of the smoke pit, their voices hushed yet insistent, each story layering on the next, from shadows flitting across hallways to inexplicable sounds that made the night watches unbearable. Sergeant M, despite his experience and interest in the occult, admitted to a visceral fear that transcended superstition, the kind that makes your chest tighten, your palms sweat, and your rational mind scramble for any explanation, knowing none would satisfy. This was the hidden theater of military life, a world beyond the drills, weapons, and physical rigor, where psychological endurance met the impossible, and where those stationed within these walls could never truly claim to know the barracks as it was in daylight. The rooms were silent then, orderly, mundane, but the night belonged to the unseen, the rumors, the unrecorded events that became legend among those who dared linger too long at the desk, eyes flicking to darkened doorways, half, expecting the impossible to manifest before them once again. And for Sergeant M, the haunted room became a symbol of the thin veil separating the known world from something far darker, a veil that could be pierced in the smallest flicker of candlelight, the faintest creak in the floorboards, or the sudden slam of a door where no hand could have reached. The barracks of Camp Margarita held an unsettling rhythm, a pulse felt most acutely during the quietest hours of the night, when only the desk duty personnel remained awake to witness the subtle anomalies that danced at the edges of perception. Sergeant M, now accustomed to the strange rumors circulating among soldiers, had prepared himself for the usual sounds of restless Marines or the groans of an old building, but nothing prepared him for the night the room whispered back. Room 316, unoccupied since the discharge of the dark magic-obsessed private, had become infamous among night watchers. Its emptiness belied the sensations it evoked, a faint stench of burned plastic, a low humming vibration through the floor, and an atmosphere thick enough to taste. That Thursday night, as Sergeant M and his CQ runner sat at the desk, the room seemed to breathe before it roared. A deafening, metallic screech, like steel ripping in half, while a distorted scream echoed across the walls, saturating the corridor with a presence that defied comprehension. They approached cautiously, the hairs on their necks standing on end, hearts hammering against the ribs like a warning drumbeat. Nothing awaited them. The room was physically immaculate, yet the air was alive with something unseen, watching, sentient. The oppressive sensation intensified with each step into the space. Every corner seemed to stretch impossibly, shadows shifting in impossible ways. Then, as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that threw the lieutenant backward, the hydraulic closer resisting in vain, leaving even the most skeptical breathless and pale. Attempts to unlock it failed. The keycard refused to cooperate, the door mocking their authority. Though logic demanded an explanation, none came. Only the lingering echo of the roar, the inexplicable odor, the feeling of invisible eyes upon them. Soldiers whispered at the smoke pit about similar encounters, objects moving without contact, footsteps in empty corridors, whispers in languages unknown, each tale adding weight to the growing mythos of the barracks, a legend of Room 316 that transformed fear into an unspoken camaraderie, a shared bond among those who had glimpsed the impossible. Sergeant M, though pragmatic and experienced, began to understand the delicate balance between the seen and unseen, the conscious and subconscious. The military, a world built on orders, discipline, and measurable outcomes, offered no guidance for such phenomena. Yet these stories persisted, passed quietly from soldier to soldier, like smoke curling in the night air, weaving a tapestry of mystery and dread, each narrative confirming the others, reinforcing a reality that defied reason. And it was not only the noises or the physical sensations, it was the psychological residue, the creeping doubt, the sleepless nights spent imagining eyes in the darkness, the impossibility of escaping the mental imprint of the haunted room. Even on days when the barracks hummed with mundane activity, the memory of that night lingered like a shadow across Sergeant M's consciousness, a reminder that in the military, danger did not always come from foreign lands or battlefield engagements. Sometimes, it came from the very walls that housed the men sworn to defend against the world, a subtle, unrelenting pressure that questioned sanity, belief, and the very nature of reality itself. The smoke pit remained the sanctuary for these conversations, a place to breathe in the scent of cigarettes and exhale the tension of what was seen and what could not be explained, while the barracks around them seemed to pulse with secrets, every door concealing stories of the unearthly, and every shadow an unspoken witness to the strange and terrifying phenomena that defined room 316's dark legacy. Outside the fluorescent glare of the barracks, the smoke pit was a liminal space, a place where the mundane and the supernatural collided. And it was here that Sergeant M first met Tripp, a Marine whose stories would blur the line between reality and imagination, soldiering and storytelling, life and legend. Tripp, a fellow veteran stationed in Okinawa, had already begun chronicling strange events and paranormal encounters in the series Smoke Pit Fairy Tales, a sprawling narrative that began with ordinary military operations but quickly descended into the extraordinary, blending combat experiences with inexplicable, otherworldly phenomena. That evening, as smoke curled lazily into the warm night air, Tripp recounted a harrowing firefight in Afghanistan, describing the chaos of sand, gunfire, and the unnerving presence of things unseen, moments that escalated into encounters with forces neither soldier nor human could explain. Hank and Doc, his fictional avatars and mirrors of his own experiences, became immortalized by a freak accident that separated them from their platoon, forcing them into a surreal, apocalyptic journey across World War III, alien invasions, and scenarios that tested both courage and sanity. Tripp's tales were more than fiction. They were drawn from a lifetime of observation, fleeting glimpses of shadows and figures at the edge of perception, whispers in empty corridors, and the inexplicable movements of objects in barracks rooms that left even the most rational Marines questioning their senses. He told of moments when the ordinary transformed into the uncanny. Helicopters descending into blinding dust clouds, explosions of light and sound that seemed almost choreographed by an unseen hand, and the relentless tension of watching comrades fight both tangible and intangible adversaries. Each story, as he described it, was meticulously crafted yet unmistakably grounded in military life. The smell of sand and sweat, the rhythmic clatter of boots on concrete, the distant hum of generators, all juxtaposed against an eerie, almost alien presence that defied comprehension. As the night deepened, Sergeant M felt the familiar sense of dread that had haunted him in room 316, now intertwined with a thrilling curiosity. He realized that these smoke pit tales were a way for soldiers to process encounters that could never be officially acknowledged, the surreal narratives serving as both therapy and warning, myth and memory. Tripp spoke of a particular incident in 29 Palms, where he awoke to a shadowy, hazy mass at the foot of his bed, a presence neither corporeal nor entirely spectral, that hovered with intent but never aggression, testing his courage, his perception, and the boundaries of reality itself. Even more unsettling were the shared experiences, moments when comrades would glimpse the same figures or feel the same oppressive pressure in empty rooms, suggesting a thin, permeable veil between the physical world and something far more enigmatic. The smoke pit became their confessional, the crucible in which these tales were exchanged, refined, and elevated into legend. Soldiers who had faced death abroad now faced mysteries that defied explanation in the supposed safety of their own barracks. Sergeant M listened intently as Tripp's voice painted vivid images. Fires igniting in patterns that defied logic, metallic screeches echoing through empty halls, figures of pale, otherworldly beings communicating without words, and the disquieting sensation that reality itself was bending around them. By the end of the night, it was clear that these smoke pit fairy tales were not mere entertainment. They were a record of what happens when human endurance meets the inexplicable, a fusion of military experience and paranormal mystery, a testament to the strange, often terrifying world that exists just beyond the threshold of the known. And as the last embers of their cigarettes glowed in the dark, Sergeant M understood that the barracks, the smoke pit, and the soldiers themselves were all part of the story that continued to unfold, a tale in which courage, fear, and the supernatural were inseparably intertwined. Tripp's experiences went beyond the battlefield. They invaded the mind, manifesting in dreams and lucid states that made the line between reality and imagination vanish. A liminal world where the barracks, the battlefield, and the supernatural collided in vivid, sometimes terrifying detail. During his time at Camp Pendleton, he discovered the strange power of lucid dreaming, training his mind to recognize the dream state and take control of its unfolding narrative. Yet even mastery could not protect him from the intrusion of the unknown. One night, as he slept in room 316, the same haunted space where Sergeant M had once felt the presence of unseen eyes, Tripp became aware of a duplicate of himself across the room, conversing with a pale, greenish figure whose skin seemed almost translucent, devoid of human warmth, wearing a beige, turtleneck-like robe that flowed into a single, seamless garment, devoid of arms, as if designed by some alien logic. This entity spoke cryptically, claiming it was not here, a visitor from a place or dimension impossible for the human mind to conceptualize, observing without malice, yet exuding an authority that froze the marrow in his bones. Then, in an instant, the figure opened its grotesque mouth, a gaping maw filled with dagger-like teeth, and vanished as Tripp awoke with his heart hammering, only to find the barracks eerily silent, his roommate asleep, yet the lingering dread persisted, a physical weight pressing down on him, as if the room itself had absorbed the encounter and refused to let him go. Nights later, he encountered a dark, smoky mass at the foot of his bed in 29 Palms, intangible yet undeniably present, hovering, moving, and watching, a manifestation that tested his courage and perception, compelling him to confront the limits of reality and his own mind. These incidents coincided with the development of his lucid dreaming practice, where he could fly above forests, feel the wind in his hands, soar over mountains, and yet, when fear or doubt crept in, the dream would glitch violently, collapsing into white light, and then, terrifyingly, teleport him back to the forest mid-fall, over and over, leaving him uncertain whether he was awake or trapped in a loop of layered dreams. Each encounter, whether in the dreamscape or in the barracks, reinforced the notion that some soldiers were sensitive to forces beyond human understanding, the threshold between worlds permeable to those who had faced both death and the extraordinary, whose minds had been conditioned to recognize patterns of threat, yet now confronted phenomena entirely without precedent. Tripp's shared experiences, often discussed at the smoke pit with Sergeant M and others, became a ritual of confession and validation, where disbelief was suspended and stories were amplified by the shared human need to make sense of the inexplicable. They spoke of glowing figures, shadowy masses, distorted sounds, and presences that bent space and perception, tales that merged with the lore of the barracks, creating a mythos that was at once terrifying and strangely comforting. If you had survived combat, you could survive the impossible. For Tripp, these encounters became a guide, teaching him not just courage, but the limits of perception, the fragility of certainty, and the vast, unknowable potential of human consciousness. Each lucid dream, each shadow in a corner, each whispered story by the smoke pit became a thread in a tapestry connecting soldiers across time and space, uniting the mundane military existence with a hidden, extraordinary world that exists just beyond sight. And in understanding that, Tripp began to craft his smoke pit fairy tales, blending raw military reality with imagination, horror, and wonder, turning encounters that might have driven a lesser person to madness in a narrative art. A testament to the strange intersections of human bravery, fear, and the paranormal, and to the resilience of those willing to confront the shadows that lurk both within and beyond themselves. Lucid dreaming had taught Tripp control, but nothing could prepare him for the night when reality fractured into layers, each one indistinguishable from the last, a terrifying labyrinth of consciousness that tested every instinct, every shred of sanity he had left. While stationed at Camp Pendleton, after months of disciplined practice with his hands as anchors to recognize the dream state, he found himself soaring above a forest of towering pines, the wind rushing past him, the mountains stretching endlessly, the vivid scenery a testament to his newfound control. Yet in an instant, doubt crept in. What if he fell? The thought itself triggered a cascade of surreal events. He plummeted toward the forest floor, bracing for impact, only to pass straight through the earth as though it were a phantom scream, and the moment he rose again, the fall repeated, faster and more terrifying, until the lines between dream and reality blurred entirely. Upon waking, he found himself in his barracks bed, but something was wrong. The glass bottles stacked around him by a roommate's prank shattered beneath his movements. Yet when he blinked, they were gone, and the room appeared unchanged, yet fully remembered in exact detail from the previous awakening. Another awakening followed, the same dark room, the same dim moonlight filtering through blinds. Mitch asleep across the room, yet Tripp's memory held every detail from the layered dreams, creating a vertigo of uncertainty. Which awakening was real, which imagined? And was there even a distinction? The experience induced a gnawing dread, a physical tension that radiated from spine to fingertips, the kind of fear that whispers of losing touch with reality and the mind's inability to distinguish the tangible from the ephemeral. This recursive nightmare continued until he finally allowed himself to surrender to sleep, trusting that the next awakening would restore order. Yet even then, a lingering sense of unreality remained, a persistent question mark hovering over the familiar details of the barracks room, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint creak of the floorboards, the smell of coffee and stale air. Every ordinary element now charged with existential uncertainty. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers trained to endure explosions, gunfire, and hostile environments suddenly faced a battlefield inside their own minds, where fear and wonder coexisted, where control could collapse in an instant, and where even mastery of lucid dreaming could not shield them from the mind's inherent unpredictability. Sharing the tale at the smoke pit with comrades was both a release and a test. Would they understand, or would they dismiss it as hallucination or bravado? As always, the stories circulated with an added layer of the unexplainable, building upon the mythos of the barracks, where the ordinary world collided with visions that defied human logic. Tripp realized that these dreams, though terrifying, were a mirror of his consciousness, reflecting the latent fears and the untested courage accumulated during years of service, blending combat conditioning with the subtle knowledge that some forces, visible or invisible, will test you in ways that cannot be prepared for. These encounters left an indelible mark, shaping his creative work in Smoke Pit Fairy Tales, a series where reality, military experience, and the paranormal intersect seamlessly. Each story is synthesis of personal trial, psychological endurance, and narrative artistry. The layered dreams, the shadows at the foot of the bed, the impossible slamming of doors and unexplained sounds became more than anecdote. They were evidence that the human mind can inhabit multiple planes of existence simultaneously. That bravery is as much about confronting the unseen within as the visible threats without. and that the smoke pit, whether in Okinawa, Pendleton, or a desert outpost overseas, remained a threshold between the ordinary and extraordinary, a place where stories lived, whispered, and grew into legend. By the time Sergeant M and Tripp had shared countless nights at the smoke pit, the stories of the barracks, the haunted rooms, and the impossible dreams had coalesced into a living tapestry of military legend, a blend of fear, wonder, and the unexplainable that defined their time in service as much as any mission or deployment. Room 316 remained a focal point, its dark legacy stitched into every whisper and anecdote. The inexplicable smells, the roars of metal tearing in empty corridors, the doors that slammed with impossible force, and a lingering sense of being watched had become as real to soldiers as any drill or order, a constant reminder that danger was not always outside the perimeter. Tripp's experiences, layered with lucid dreams where he soared above mountains only to plummet into recursive nightmares, revealed the fragility of perception, the vulnerability of the mind, and the strange ways in which human consciousness can be manipulated by forces unseen, whether psychological, spiritual, or cosmic. The smoke pit itself became a sanctuary and a confessional, a place where ordinary Marines could recount the extraordinary without fear of dismissal, where laughter, disbelief, and terror intertwined as thickly as the cigarette smoke rising into the Okinawan night. Soldiers spoke of spectral figures glowing with ethereal light, dark smoky masses that shifted with intent, voices heard in empty hallways, and the sensation of presence in otherwise uninhabited rooms. Each tale reinforced the others, forming a web of experience that was equal parts warning, entertainment, and validation. Beyond the barracks, the legend extended to the battlefield, where the stress of combat, the isolation of foreign lands, and the constant awareness of mortality primed the mind for encounters with phenomena that defied explanation. Lights in the desert sky, unidentifiable movements in the tree line, and a visceral sense that the ordinary world was layered atop of something far stranger. Through these shared stories, Sergeant M and Tripp discovered a profound truth. Military life, with all its rigor and discipline, prepares soldiers not just for physical challenges, but for psychological ones. And those who are attuned to the subtle, the hidden, and the extraordinary often find themselves at the intersection of reality and the paranormal. The smoke pit fairy tales, written and spoken, became a bridge between these worlds, blending memoir, legend, and speculative horror, preserving the memory of those who faced both the tangible enemy and the intangible mysteries that haunted the barracks and the mind alike. And in this convergence, soldiers found meaning and camaraderie, realizing that survival was not merely a matter of training or equipment, but of awareness, courage, and the ability to navigate the unknown with steady nerves and a watchful eye. As night fell and the smoke curled into the starry sky, the legends persisted, whispered from one Marine to another, ensuring that Room 316, the shadows, the lucid dreams, and the uncanny encounters were never forgotten, a permanent fixture in the mythology of military life, a testament to the strange, uncharted spaces where human bravery, curiosity, and the supernatural intersect. In the end, the smoke pit was more than a place to smoke or tell stories. It was a portal, a threshold, a liminal space where the impossible became possible, where the ordinary met the extraordinary, and where every Marine who lingered, listened, and dared to believe added another thread to the ongoing narrative, leaving behind a legacy that would echo long after deployments ended and barracks empty. A reminder that some of the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, perception, and the willingness to confront what lies beyond the visible world.